Welcome to the Blueprints to Buildings podcast. I'm your host, Glen Palmer, and on this show, I interview the movers and shakers in the world of property development and real estate. Now, before we dive in, a very quick word. This show is brought to you by a visual technology that is quietly making waves in the property industry. Developers are using it to cut design costs and accelerate off-plan sales in a way that sounds almost too good to be true. If you are curious, message me directly on LinkedIn at Glen Palmer Online or check out the show notes below. So, on today's episode, I am joined by Paul Patterson. Now, he is the founder of Elevation Carbon, a no nonsense building performance firm obsessed with one thing: measuring results over greenwash in cost, carbon, and real world outcomes. Paul, really appreciate you being on the show. Thanks very much for taking your time out. I know that you're extremely busy. So if we can jump right in, we'll dive right in.
Let's do it. Nice to be here. Thanks.
Brilliant. So Paul, one question I ask absolutely everybody, and if you've seen the show, you're gonna know it. If time travel became a reality and you had a chance to go back in time to when you actually first started your career, what advice would the person that you are now tell your younger self?
Well, really interesting question. I would take the sports almanac with me, but there's probably three things that I'd
Love that
three things
reference.
three things that I'd want to look at. I used to be preoccupied with measuring and collecting data. Perhaps from a design. I used to be a designer of MEP building services. I'd probably say, look, don't stress yourself about too much. There's only a few things that ultimately matter in the end, so just try and focus on them. I'd probably steer myself away from getting into the kind of minutiae of modeling. These things are guides rather than having to be the most accurate things of all time. And also it doesn't matter if you're going to be thinking differently than what the others are saying is true. But what you shouldn't do is just kind of keep that to yourself. Try and vocalize that a little bit earlier in your career, perhaps is another piece of advice that I'd give.
Yeah, nice. Be a little bit more forthcoming.
Maybe,
So
yeah. Yeah.
Well, you're quite outspoken, and we said it in your introduction that performance without greenwash. So, where do you actually think that the sustainability conversation actually went wrong, and why are so many green buildings or supposedly green buildings still underperforming in reality?
So as the more I've been involved in this over the last decade, so to speak, is compliance has become the goal. We're not really thinking about the outcome. Everyone's been focused on the process, the paperwork, the checklist, the bureaucracy, and kind of
Mm.
forgetting that there's an outcome at the end. So that's kind of been a divergence of between what's important and what's not important. We've not really been looking hard, taking a hard look at how buildings are actually performing once people have moved in, once they're operated. So for me, the intention of all of this has always been good, but as I say, process has been the driver of success rather than what was the outcome delivered, what was the value delivered to the client, and then results are kind of never really validated either. And there's a number of reasons for that. No one asks them to. Is reason number one, but we've kind of not really thought as to why we wouldn't be doing that. So buildings are buildings have got great credentials, great badges, but when you kind of look behind the scenes, maybe they're not operating as efficiently. Maybe they're using much more energy than what anyone would have anticipated. And the worst thing is, no one really knows until they check their meters after the end of a year.
Yeah. So a lot of it with sort of green companies is basically rubber stamping it without
It's
actually.
rubber stamping, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so you got energy models, leads, Esidama. You've said that these are often misused. What are the most dangerous assumptions developers make when they rely on compliance instead of actual performance? Going back to your previous question as well.
Well, developers shouldn't just take it as fact that the energy model is correct. I've seen some really problematic things over my time, and that models are generally being just re-engineered in order to validate a predefined result that someone wants to achieve. So these energy models, whereas what they should be is a central way of managing and delivering a high performance building, are generally used as just a validation of a number that's already been predefined in a design, and someone waits till the design is finished, puts it all into an energy model calculation, and voila, the answer comes that enables the number of lead credits to be given. So these models aren't generally giving that true insight into building performance. They're just, again, they're just ticking a box. The other problem that I think developers perhaps don't quite see at this point in time is that no matter what their certification says or what the energy model says, if it hasn't been done by a qualified and talented team who understand how buildings perform, the risk is the answer just can't even be relied on anyway, and the variance during the building performance is going to be wildly different than what the energy model said. So again, the value is kind of hidden. It's not being used. And then sometimes it's just been kind of gamed to suit the certification
Yeah.
scheme, really.
So do you think it'll be sort of quite important to have energy performance post building? So once the tenant is in, once they've started to use the building, would you think that, having a breakdown from the model, this is what the model says, to the actual energy consumption of that building, do you think that would be more of a uh, thing to come forward in the future, or is it just going to be based on the model still?
I think that should be where the direction of travel is going. I know there's a certification program called Neighbours, which does insist on that check happening, that relation between the prediction and the actual as part of a validation process that you have to go through for that specific scheme. But that's kind of the exception at the
Yeah.
moment. We did a project many years ago where we looked at the design of a new department store. It was actually in the UK, and we used this kind of theory that we're talking about just now. We used the model to design the building, to predict the energy, and then went in through a process with that client to review the performance of all the systems and the services back with the prediction and see where the variance was. And the idea was, if you could see something that is out with the realms of expectation, then that is, in theory, that's a problem for your operation.
Hmm.
Perhaps your chiller isn't working properly, your boiler isn't coming on at the right time, there's issues with your valves and your controls. These all, yeah, like proactive flagging of issues before they happen is what really the benefit of that type of approach that you're describing can give. But the very fact of it is, in no other world do you just predict and then never validate. In no other
Yeah.
industry does that actually happen. It's only in construction for
Yeah.
reasons that are probably a lot out with our control, the silo, the different parties involved. But it's just an unusual thing for us to deem to be normal. It's abnormal, and we should be
Yeah.
saying that to each other.
Yeah, exactly. So early clarity seems to be everything in your line of work. So how much better would outcome be if teams could see and understand the performance, the cost, and the carbon trade-offs spatially and visually from day one, rather than having those disconnected spreadsheets and reports all over the place?
I think that's, for the conversations that we have, that's the thing that's generally missing, and it's difficult to understand. And it seems to be difficult for sustainability teams or engineering teams to tell that value story to clients. And so
Mm,
we end up in the situation that we're currently in. I've looked at this in a number of ways. I've looked at it as in you've got to do energy models better. You've got to do this at the start. You've got to have these people talking to these people. But the older I get, not the wiser, only the older, the more I can see that there's just that the construction industry operates in a certain way. You'll spend your lifetime trying to change how the construction world operates. I'm not sure how successful you will eventually be. So the way we've looked at it is you got to be able to identify the parameters of performance from the start of a project, and that is energy, water, cost, carbon. You got
hmm
to be able to do using the information that's available at a very early stage. You've got to come up with a way that defines the caps, like an envelope of performance that if then the design team and then the operation team, the construction team don't exceed, that your targets will be met. You don't necessarily need to get into the minutiae of the details. You just want to be sure that the big things have been identified at the start and they're able to be tracked and monitored all the way through. But from what I can see, unless you're able to connect risk, carbon, cost, and energy, people don't necessarily want to listen that much. You have to be able to display the trade-off at the start. Why are we going for these credits? It costs me X, I should be getting a return. Well, why should we go for this energy performance? Well, if you don't, the cost over 20 years is going to be whatever it may be. Is this something you want to accept? These are the added bits of information that if we can get them to developers, better decisions can be made. And I think ultimately buildings will naturally perform better because no matter what we think, carbon, climate emissions, sustainability comes down to someone paying money at the start.
Yeah.
It comes into capital expenditure,
Yeah. So in your opinion, why is it genuinely critical to limit the carbon impact for new developments now, rather than pushing that responsibility onto the future retrofits and offsets, especially from sort of a commercial and regulatory risk perspective?
Well, again, it's back to the previous point. Without talking about this up front, you're allowing everyone to kick the can down the road. The can is still there. The problem doesn't vanish. So if you're with a developer or the investment team, they are not just they're building these assets to sell or lease or to be in it for 10 years and then get rid of or to exit. Each one of these to lock in bad carbon performance at the start is actually to lock in a reduction in return at the end. So it's supremely critical. Again, back to the previous point, you've got to be able to tell the story of the overall life cycle impact of these, not just in carbon and energy terms, but in financial terms, in risk related to brown discounting, and carbon tax risk. Perhaps the nation, I know here in the UAE, there's a net zero trajectory to 2050, which all the developers are now having to think about. Okay, we're building millions of GFA. How do we make sure we're on the same glide path? Without talking, enabling this at the start, we're not actually doing our job. We're allowing people to store our problems later. And I'm always saying the places where I go to talk about retrofit is, if you're talking about retrofit, it's already too late. You've got to be taking retrofits out of the equation at the design stage. And that's, again, thinking about what does the next 10, 15 years look like, not just now. It's the longer term, the longer term piece.
Yeah. And you focus on real metrics, the EUI, WI, embodied carbon, ROI. So which of these do decision makers most underestimate? And which one usually ends up biting them on the ass later on down the line?
Well, I'm going to say energy use intensity, because by proxy you can take the operational carbon from that. So for me, energy use intensity is the big one that everyone kind of ignores. The way that generally the new builds are defined is always in a relative improvement measure. So a percentage improvement against a baseline from 2020, 2015, 2010, even depending on what region they're in, what certification scheme they're in. It's all relative, but my view has always been you got to look at absolute terms. What's the energy use of this new building that you're creating? You don't want to get that wrong or allow it to be higher than what it should be against benchmarks, against your own corporate strategy of where you're trying to take your portfolio. You get it wrong, you've just locked in all future risk, because you don't know where energy prices are going to go. You don't know what's going to be happening in the future. You're kind of adding more and more risk the higher that number gets. So it's understanding where you want to be and how to ensure that you keep that as low as possible and de-risk.
Yeah. Well, Paul, really loved you having on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation on the importance of carbon neutral projects, not only from the environmental side, but obviously from a cost perspective as well. And how important it actually is in the construction industry, and how we should all be paying a lot more attention to what we're doing. And once again, thank you very much to my listeners and viewers of YouTube. Paul, just before we sign off, if listeners or viewers they want to get in contact with you, learn about what you offer at Elevation Carbon, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, just check out the website, elevationcarbon.io. Shoot me a message, hello at elevationcarbon.io, or look me up, Paul Patterson with one T, importantly, on LinkedIn. Yeah, it'd be great to talk to anyone. And thanks again, Glenn, for
Excellent.
having me on.
You're more than welcome. Thank you very much. That's it for today's show. Remember, this show is supported by a new prop tech tool that's redefining how visualization even means in property. The ones using it now are already pulling ahead. You've been listening to the Blueprints to Buildings podcast. I'm your host, Glen Palmer, and I was joined today by Paul Patterson. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.